Welcome to This Week in Podcasting, where we discuss this week's most exciting podcasting news and tips, all in under 10 minutes. Episode 17 is provided by Sounder.fm, the smarter way to podcast. Let's get started. This week we cover how to be a great podcast interviewee, the changing landscape of audio advertisements, an update on Entercom's acquisitions, what science has to say about falling asleep to podcasts, and our random tech quiz of the week. For all the tips on how to host a great interview on your podcast, there aren't many that cover how to be successful on the other end of that conversation. Guest spotting on someone else's show is a great opportunity to grow your community, build your credibility on a subject, and align yourself with other podcasters. Thankfully, Colin Gray, managing director of The Podcast Host, has a few basic pointers on how to be the best interviewee. The first, showing up. Don't leave someone hanging on the other end of a Zoom call. Basic human decency? Check. Next, use your good gear. If you don't already have a solid USB mic and stand, we linked to Gray's article in the show notes, so you can check out his recommendations. Also, make the best use of the time you're investing in this interview by choosing a quiet spot to record. If you don't already have a location set up for your own podcast, in your home or elsewhere, this is a great excuse to seek one out. When it comes to content, be prepared to answer that first origin story question in about 1 to 2 minutes, or 200 to 300 words. Your answer should cover your subject experience and success, a personal story with values and maybe some failures, and interesting topics to get into later. This is your first impression. Make it compelling. That being said, Gray reminds us that an interview is not a monologue. When I listen to an interview like this, where someone speaks for 5 minutes at a time, solo, it just sends me to sleep. Where is the chemistry, the banter? He writes. Lastly, to be a great interviewee, consider offering obvious takeaways to listeners. Think homework, writes Gray. You've just taught a class. What can the student do next to solidify that learning in their minds, to transform it from theory into practice? This just in, Entercom's acquisition of podcast publishers Cadence 13 and Pineapple Street Media is paying off. You may remember us reporting in episode 10 that Entercom, the second largest radio company in the U.S., has spent more than $48 million investment in podcast companies this year. In August, David Field, the CEO of Entercom, was optimistic that the growth in advertising and scale benefits would make these purchases profitable in the long run, and he was right. Today, Radio Inc. reports that Entercom expects to break even and make $50 million by the end of the year. With over 150 million downloads per month, this makes Entercom a leader in sports, news, and local personalities. Up next, the podcasting industry is peaking at digital media's advertising model, which may mean a surge in something called Programmatic Radio. Let's take a look. Right now, most audio ads are sold directly to podcast publishers, where they are performed by show hosts as live reads. You know, like when your favorite host takes a break from her story to talk about a product she loves. This model works. The Wall Street Journal reports Barstool Sports Inc., whose podcasts include Pardon My Take and Spittin' Chiclets, refuses any podcast ad formats except live reads. And Barstool Sports Inc. is on track to generate more than $22 million in podcast ad revenue this year. Programmatic advertising, on the other hand, is the use of technology to automate the selling and insertion of ads in audio content, explains Clear Code, an agency that customizes advertising software for tech companies. This would be more like those rotating peppy ads created by brands or products. Some podcast publishers hope programmatic technology can help them make money off older shows by substituting fresh ads in for new listeners, and less about fostering a relationship between the host and the listener. What do you think? Have you ever fallen asleep listening to a podcast? Have you ever done so on purpose? Hannah Smothers shamelessly admits to doing just that in her article published with Vice. 2 years ago, I found a source of white noise that's extremely calming to my heathen brain and lulls me back to sleep every single time. Bachelor franchise gossip podcasts, writes Smothers. It's more scientific than it seems. Craig Richard, a professor of pharmaceutical sciences at Shenandoah University and podcast host of 2 sleep shows of his own, says there are 4 pillars that make a show successful for sleep: a calm host voice, focused attention on the listener, kindness, and general banal content. He says you're distracting your mind from the stressful thoughts that raise your alertness. Other related theories about sleeping with background noise agree that soft, mundane noise makes it more difficult for a sleeper to be jolted awake by sudden, abnormal sounds, like a car honking outside or a phone buzzing, writes Smothers. Now, there are scientific podcasts dedicated to helping listeners fall asleep, namely Sleep With Me by Drew Ackerman, who meanders through a non-threatening story and had over 70,000 regular listeners in 2016. So you're not committed to Bachelor gossip, unless, like Smothers, it works for you. And last but not least, our random tech quiz of the week. According to the Consumer Technology Association's 26th Annual Consumer Technology Holiday Purchase Pattern Study, 186 million U.S. adults, 74%, intend to buy a tech-related gift this year. Can you guess what's in the top spot? Tune in next week to find out. That's all we have for This Week in Podcasting. Keep on creating.